Only 3 weeks remained until my daughter Haley Grant's wedding. I stopped by a small bridal boutique downtown to watch her final dress fitting the kind of simple father duty you imagine. See your kid glowing with happiness, sign off on the last payments, and head home feeling like everything in life is finally lining up. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The shop owner, Marilyn Mayer Collins, didn't greet me with the usual polite smile. Instead, she stared at me like she'd just seen a ghost. Her face went pale. Then she hurried across the room, grabbed my wrist, and pulled me closer. She leaned in so close I could feel her breath and whispered, like she was afraid the security cameras might hear. "Sir, get into the fitting room. Now. Now. Now." I didn't even have time to ask what was going on. She guided me quickly past rows of white dresses, opened a fitting room at the end of the hallway, and pushed me inside. The door clicked shut. I stood there alone, surrounded by the scent of new fabric and the low hum of the air conditioner, my heart pounding hard in my chest. Because when a stranger looks that scared, right before your daughter's wedding, you know something is very, very wrong. Outside the fitting room, I heard Haley's voice and a man's voice. I knew far too well Brandon Pierce, the boy I had raised like my own son. And right then I understood something. This wasn't about a wedding dress anymore. I'm not telling this story so people can enjoy a little drama and forget about it 5 minutes later. I'm telling it because the worst betrayals rarely come from strangers. They come from the people you feed, protect, and trust inside your own home. Sometimes, they even come with the quiet help of your own child. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious how many people out there have ever had that gut feeling something is wrong but pushed it aside because you didn't want to start a fight or make a scene. I've changed a few small details to protect real people, but the lesson is exactly the same. When someone tells you to hide on the most important day of your child's life, it means they're protecting a secret heavy enough to tear a family apart. And right behind that fitting room door, I held my breath inside the cramped space. Outside, Marilyn Mayer Collins moved hangers around, pretending to adjust dresses while I pressed my ear against the wall. Mayer quietly slipped a small recorder into my hand and gave me a sharp look, "Stay quiet." Then Haley Grant's voice came through first, low and urgent. "We have to do this fast. If Dad gets suspicious, the whole plan falls apart." Then Brandon Pierce let out a short, mocking laugh, the same voice I'd heard around my house for more than a decade. Only now, hearing it through that thin wall, it made my spine go cold. "That old man?" he sneered. "Push him into a nursing home, and it's done. Once the paperwork says he's mentally incompetent, anything he signs won't matter anyway." There was a short silence. Haley didn't speak for a moment, like she was swallowing something heavy. Brandon continued, his voice steady, the kind of steady that comes from someone who has rehearsed this conversation before. "After the wedding, we activate the plan. He won't even have time to react. Mayor doesn't know anything. The staff doesn't know anything. Once he's out of the house, the money starts flowing to us." My hand tightened around the recorder Mayor had slipped me. My heart was pounding, but strangely, my mind felt perfectly calm, because in that moment I realized something very clearly. They weren't talking about a wedding. They were talking about removing me from my own life. I was still trying to keep my hands from shaking when Brandon dropped the sentence that made my blood run cold. "Haley, listen carefully. This isn't a real wedding." Haley snapped back immediately, her voice tight and nervous. "Keep your voice down." Brandon let out another dry laugh. "What real about it?" he said. "It's just a formality, a key to unlock what we need. After that, we deal with the rest." Haley's voice came back, shaky like someone who was scared but still clinging to the plan. "But what if Dad finds out?" Brandon answered as casually as if he were talking about switching phone plans. He won't have time to find out. We move him into a nursing home before he can ask a single serious question. Once he's labeled mentally incompetent, he can scream all he wants. People will just call it confusion. I stood there in that tiny fitting room, every word cutting like a blade. The worst part wasn't Brandon being cruel. The worst part was Haley didn't object. She didn't say no. She didn't push back. All she worried about was keeping her voice down, making sure the plan stayed on track. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. The wedding dress outside was just a prop. This wedding was a trap. At first, I thought it was only Haley and Brandon. But then another voice joined them, a woman's voice, sharp and controlled. The kind you hear from someone used to running plans and giving orders. "All right," she said coolly. "That's enough. Let's review the timeline." Samantha Rowe. I recognized the name the moment the voice spoke. I heard the sharp click of her heels on the wooden floor of the bridal shop, followed by the soft rustle of papers like she had just opened a folder. Samantha spoke in a calm, steady tone, the way someone does when they're running through a project checklist. "Haley's father still trusts you, correct? How far along is the paperwork? Who's handling the doctor? Who's securing the nursing home? The money needs to move in stages. We can't trigger a bank alert." Her voice never wavered. It sounded less like a conversation and more like a meeting. Haley spoke again, quieter this time. "What if my dad finds out before the wedding?" Samantha's answer came back cold and immediate. "Then we move faster. Don't give him time to wake up." Brandon chuckled under his breath. "Relax. These days all it takes is one little label, memory issues. Once that's on record, the old man's finished." I stood frozen in that fitting room, listening. The humming air conditioner, the muffled voices through the wall, the recorder in my hand capturing every word. 3 people outside were calmly planning how to erase me from my own life, my house, my money, my freedom. And the worst part? One of them was the daughter I had raised. Right then, in that cramped little room between rows of white wedding dresses, something inside me went completely still. Not panic, not anger, just clarity. Because when people think you're already finished, they stop being careful. And thanks to Mayor's recorder, every word of their plan was now sitting in the palm of my hand. By that point, I understood something that made the room feel even colder. This wasn't 2 reckless young people making a stupid plan. This was an operation. Someone was coordinating it, and Samantha Rowe was the one behind the wheel. I heard her tap her fingers lightly against the table, the tone of someone finalizing a deal. "The most important step," she said firmly, "is that the wedding has to look real." Then she said the sentence that made every muscle in my body tense. "Ethan Cole isn't some destined groom. He's an actor we hired." Haley sucked in a quick breath. "But won't people notice?" Brandon laughed under his breath. "Who's going to notice? Guests come for pictures, free drinks, and Instagram stories. Nobody runs background checks at a wedding." Samantha continued, calm and precise, like she had rehearsed this dozens of times. "The ceremony creates the distraction. Everyone's attention will be on the bride and groom. Meanwhile, the legal paperwork gets signed that same week. Medical evaluation, guardianship request, financial access." She paused. "Once Haley's father is declared incompetent, the power of attorney shifts. After that, the assets are easy." Inside the fitting room, I felt something strange settle over me. Not rage, not shock, just a cold, sharp realization. My daughter's wedding wasn't the celebration I thought it was. It was the cover story for a legal ambush designed to erase me from my own life. And outside that thin wall, the people planning it were laughing like they had already won. Samantha's voice stayed calm, sharp, and efficient, the tone of someone who had done this kind of thing before. "The real name is Logan Price. He's flying in from Miami. 50,000 in cash. His job is simple. Stand next to Haley, sign the papers, smile, kiss the bride, and disappear. Haley's voice trembled a little. The marriage license? Samantha answered instantly. It's real. That's why this works. After a few months, we file for an annulment. On paper, Haley will already be married, and that activates everything we need. Inside the fitting room, I gripped the recorder so tightly my hands started to ache, because by then I understood the truth. The wedding dress hanging outside was just paint on the surface. Underneath it, this whole thing was a financial setup disguised as a wedding. Then Samantha lowered her voice, like she was finally revealing the core of the operation. The wedding is just the key, she said. The real target is the trust funds. There was a brief silence outside. Then Brandon asked, almost casually, "And once the trust is unlocked?" Samantha didn't hesitate. Once Haley's father is declared mentally unfit, control shifts. The trustees will accept the legal documents. After that, the money moves. My chest felt tight, but my mind stayed clear. Years of saving, investments, the trust I had built for my family, something meant to protect them long after I was gone. They weren't just trying to push me into a nursing home. They were trying to empty my life's work while I was still alive. And thanks to that little recorder in my hand. The funny thing about people who think they've already won is this: they start talking too much. Haley tried to keep her voice steady. But I still wouldn't have full access to everything, right? Brandon let out that smug little laugh again. Not before, no. But once you're legally married on paper, some of those clauses kick in automatically. You'll be able to sign off on a lot more. Especially once your dad is labeled as not mentally competent anymore. Then Samantha stepped in again, laying it out piece by piece like she was reading from an operations manual. After the wedding, we file the power of attorney package. All we need is one medical evaluation in the right format. Once the POA is in place, the money in the trust can be managed on his behalf. Completely legal on paper. Haley's voice shook when she asked the next part. "And my dad?" Brandon answered, without a shred of shame. "Your dad will be at Golden Meadows. Once he's there, anything he signs won't count, and anything he says gets written off as confusion. If we move fast, he won't have time to fight back." I stood frozen inside that fitting room, because now I understood the truth. They didn't want a beautiful wedding. They wanted a marriage certificate to unlock the assets, and a power of attorney to shut me out of my own life for good. When Samantha got to the money, her voice turned even calmer, like she was explaining how to pack boxes for shipping. Pulling money straight out of the trust would be stupid. Brandon chuckled. "Exactly. Run it through a few layers, and it comes out clean." Then Samantha started laying it out in detail, with the confidence of someone who had done this before. It won't move all at once. Small transfers, steady, controlled. It goes through shell companies under other people's names. Then it gets pushed offshore Cayman or anywhere that's hard to trace. On paper, it'll be labeled as investments, consulting fees. Haley asked, and there was still a trace of hesitation in her voice. "What if the bank starts asking questions?" Samantha answered in that same clipped, icy tone. "They won't ask if the paper trail is polished enough. And once your father is at Golden Meadows, people will believe he's confused before they ever believe he's been robbed." Inside that fitting room, my hands went cold, because by then, this wasn't some ugly little gold-digging scheme anymore. This was a plan to launder and move money, hidden behind a wedding dress, champagne smiles, and family photos. Samantha paused for a second. Then she said the final part. The part that made me understand exactly why Marilyn Mayer Collins had dragged me into hiding the second I walked in. "The money only moves," she said quietly, "once he's locked down." Haley's voice came out small, unsteady. "You mean my dad?" Brandon Pierce answered like he was discussing a simple move across town. "We put him in Golden Meadows. Once he's in there, He's got no way to interfere. Then Samantha spoke again, crisp and methodical, like she was reciting legal procedure from memory. We need one properly formatted capacity evaluation. The doctor will note memory issues, confusion, and unsafe to live alone. After that, we file the paperwork to activate the power of attorney. On paper, everything becomes legal. Haley hesitated. But my dad is still completely clear-headed. Brandon let out a quiet, mocking laugh. On paper, it doesn't matter whether he is or not. What matters is who's holding the pen. Samantha's final words came out cold, hard as steel. The faster we move, the better. If he has time to react, the whole thing collapses. Inside the fitting room, my heart pounded heavily in my chest. Because now, I understood the truth with brutal clarity. They weren't just trying to take my money. They were planning to bury me alive in paperwork. I was still standing there, holding my breath, when an odd silence settled outside, the kind of silence that happens when someone suddenly senses something isn't right. Then Samantha Rowe's voice cut through it, sharp and suspicious. Wait, is there anyone else in this shop? I heard footsteps moving closer to the row of fitting rooms. My pulse shot up into my throat. If they opened that door, everything would blow open. Worse than that, they'd have the perfect excuse to accelerate the Golden Meadows plan immediately. Right then, Marilyn Mare Collins stepped in, her voice just loud enough to sound like an annoyed shop owner dealing with maintenance. It's just a technician. I called someone to check the ventilation in the fitting rooms. The last ones always get stuffy. Samantha didn't sound convinced. Then why did I hear Mare cut in before she could finish? Because the system kicks on loudly when they test it. Happens every time. Right on cue, Mare slapped the wall control panel. A loud whoosh roared through the vents above the fitting rooms. Air rushed through the ducts, drowning out the hallway for a few seconds. From inside the cramped room, I realized what she had just done. She hadn't just covered for me. She had bought me time. A few minutes later, I heard the front door shut with a hard click, and their footsteps faded down the sidewalk. The air in the hallway seemed to loosen, like the whole shop had just survived a chokehold. The fitting room door cracked open. Marilyn Mare Collins leaned in first, checked both directions, then opened it all the way. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were steady now. "Come out," she said. "Quick." She led me to a corner behind the counter where no camera pointed directly at us, then pressed a small black USB drive into my hand. Her voice was flat and efficient, no wasted words, no drama. I recorded everything. 47 minutes. Not rumors, not fragments. The whole plan, names, places, methods. I looked down at the drive sitting in my palm, tiny and weightless, and yet it felt heavier than anything I'd held in years. Because this wasn't suspicion anymore. It wasn't a gut feeling, or a father trying to explain away details he didn't want to face. This was evidence, real evidence. My daughter, my adopted son, a woman named Samantha Rowe running the operation, a fake groom, a nursing home, a doctor, a power of attorney setup, trust funds, shell companies, offshore transfers, all of it. I looked up at Mare and finally asked the question that had been burning through me since she dragged me into that fitting room. "How long have you known?" Mare swallowed once, then answered quietly, "Long enough to know if I didn't act today, they were going to bury you before you even understood what was happening." That hit harder than everything else. Not because it was dramatic, because it sounded true. I got home, and my hands were still shaking. I plugged the USB into my laptop and opened the audio file. At first, it was exactly what I had already heard in that bridal shop talk about: the fake wedding, the paperwork, the nursing home plan. But the further the recording went, the uglier it got. This wasn't just fraud anymore. It was the kind of thing that could get someone killed. Then Brandon Pierce's voice came through calm, casual, like he was telling a joke. "That brake job almost worked last time. If the old man still has doubts, I'll do it again. This time, I won't miss. I went completely still, because the brake job he was talking about was the accident 6 months earlier, the one I had always blamed on an old car and bad luck. The day my brakes failed, and I nearly went over the hill. I had spent months blaming myself, telling myself I should have checked the car sooner, telling myself maybe I was getting careless, maybe I was getting old. But now I knew the truth. It wasn't wear and tear. It wasn't bad luck. Someone had tried to kill me, and I had been sitting at family dinners with him ever since. It turned out it wasn't carelessness. It was attempted murder. In the recording, Samantha Rowe gave a short, dry laugh. "Don't rush things," she said. "Let Golden Meadows handle the legal part first. Killing him creates unnecessary risk." Brandon answered without hesitation. "Risk or not, as long as the job gets done." I stopped the audio and sat there in the dark, because from that moment on, this wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about a wedding. It was about staying alive. I rewound the recording, my heart still pounding in my chest. And then I heard Samantha say something that sounded casual, but sent a chill straight through me. "Don't be stupid like the Boston situation. That girl almost ruined everything." The room suddenly felt colder, because people don't talk about situations like that unless it's happened before. Which meant one thing: this wasn't their first time doing this. Brandon Pierce let out a short, mocking laugh. "Laura, did she actually call the police?" he said. "Without evidence, what's she going to do?" Samantha replied, her tone flat. "Yeah, but she still made me waste time cleaning things up. This time it needs to be tight. No loose ends." I sat there in silence, because words like Boston, Laura, and calling the police meant one thing before me. There had already been someone else, and Brandon didn't sound like a man talking about a mistake. He sounded like someone who had done this before. I skipped a few seconds forward in the recording. Then Brandon said something so casually it made my stomach turn. "This old guy is easier. He trusts me." I shut the laptop and stared at the USB sitting on the desk. It suddenly looked less like a storage drive and more like a live grenade. Because now I understood Brandon clearly. This wasn't just a greedy man chasing money. He worked like someone with a method: pick a target, build the story, manipulate the paperwork, and if the victim got suspicious, arrange an accident. And if Mare hadn't pulled me into that fitting room today, I might have walked straight into the final act of his plan without ever knowing it. And if I slipped up, I would just become the next name on that list. That night I sat alone in the house, staring at the USB on the table the way someone might stare at a loaded gun. Technically, I could have picked up the phone, dialed 911, and said the words, "conspiracy to kill." But I understood something brutal about situations like this. It still wouldn't be enough. If I called the police immediately, Brandon Pierce would have time to deny everything. Haley Grant would cry, say I misunderstood, and the whole story would flip overnight into a paranoid father ruining his daughter's wedding. People like them survive because they leave just enough doubt. One recording alone isn't always the knockout punch. Not without the money trail. Not without the people trail that proves the plan is real. If I moved too early, they'd run. So I made a decision. I stayed silent. Not the silence of someone afraid. The silence of someone hunting. First thing I did was back up the USB. Not one copy, several. Different drives. Different locations. If one disappeared, the truth wouldn't disappear with it. Then I started building a timeline. The fake wedding. The power of attorney. Golden Meadows. The offshore transfers. Piece by piece, I laid it out like a map of their whole operation. Because if I was going to take them down, it had to happen in one move so clean they wouldn't even see it coming. The next step was obvious. I had to watch Brandon, Samantha, and the so-called groom Ethan Cole, or Logan Price, whatever his real name was, and most important of all, I had to wait until the wedding day. The moment they thought everything had gone perfectly, that was when I would flip the table in front of every witness in the room. Because this wasn't just about saving myself anymore. I wanted the truth out in the open so Haley would no longer have a place to hide from it, and so Brandon would never get the chance to pick another victim. The next morning, Marilyn Mayor Collins sent me a message. Just an address and one sentence. You can't do this alone. When I arrived, she was already there, with a man I'd never seen before. His name was Kenneth Walsh, mid-50s maybe. Calm eyes, the kind of quiet presence that told you he'd spent a long time around very bad situations. Mare introduced him in a single sentence. Former FBI. Kenneth didn't ask how I felt. He didn't offer sympathy. He simply held out his hand and said, I handed him the USB. He plugged it into his laptop, listened through the recording without interrupting, and occasionally paused to jot down a name or a location. Brandon, Samantha Rowe, Golden Meadows, Power of Attorney, Miami, Logan Price. When the audio reached the part about the brakes, Kenneth stopped the playback and leaned back in his chair. For the first time, his expression changed. Not shocked, focused. Then he closed the laptop and looked straight at me. You're right not to go to the police yet, he said calmly. I felt my chest tighten. Why? Because right now, Kenneth replied, tapping the laptop lightly. You have a story. He can better leaders, and Kunna means the story. A managers, created, and a manner. He paused a second. What we need is a case. He didn't ask for feelings. He asked for facts. Where's the original USB? How many backup copies? What's the name of the nursing home? Who's the doctor handling the evaluation? Has any money moved yet? Who exactly is the groom? Do we have a contract? A payment trail? Anything tying him to them? I played him the key sections of the recording. Kenneth listened, nodded once, and said the first thing all morning that sounded even remotely like hope. 3 weeks is enough, he said. And just like that, the next 3 weeks were laid out with brutal precision. First, confirm the fake groom's identity, Ethan Cole, Logan Price, and trace the $50,000 payment. Second, do a financial audit. Review the trust. Look for fake invoices, suspicious transfers, and any signs money was already being routed offshore. Kenneth spoke in short, clipped sentences, like a man building a takedown brick by brick. No improvising, he said. No emotional confrontations. No warning shots. Mare folded her arms and added, and absolutely no talking to Haley yet. That one hit me harder than I expected, because part of me still wanted to believe there was some version of this where my daughter would wake up, break down, and tell me she got pulled in too deep. But Kenneth shut that fantasy down fast. If she's in the room and helping them plan, he said evenly, then right now she's not your source. She's part of the operation. That hurt. It also sounded true. Then he slid a legal pad across the table and wrote one line at the top, 3-week plan. By the time he finished, it looked less like a rescue and more like a controlled demolition. Because if we did this right, the wedding wouldn't be the day they stole my life. It would be the day the whole thing collapsed in public. During those 3 weeks, Kenneth Walsh did more than keep watch. He dissected every dollar the way a coroner dissects a body. And what they had hidden wasn't a few missing thousands. The forensic report came back with a number that made me feel sick. $2. 3 millions. For 3 years, Brandon Pierce had been siphoning money out of my trust, using every trick that makes theft look respectable on paper. Fake consulting invoices, fabricated expense reports, shell vendors. On the surface, it all looked like ordinary business costs if you didn't examine it too closely. But Kenneth examined everything closely, line by line. The pattern came into focus. Small withdrawals, repetitive vendors, payments spaced just far enough apart not to trigger immediate suspicion. It wasn't sloppy greed. It was disciplined theft. And the worst part was realizing he hadn't just been planning to rob me. He had already been doing it. For years. Quietly. Right under my nose. Kenneth circled one point in red. The money didn't disappear immediately. It moved through several layers, first cleaned, relabeled, reshaped, before finally flowing offshore. And their favorite destination was the Cayman Islands, because people like Brandon believed the same myth, that nobody can touch it. Kenneth leaned back and said something in that same steel-cold tone he used when he was certain. "Good," he said. "Then we touch it at the exact moment they feel safest." The plan locked into place. On the morning of the wedding, Kenneth's legal and forensic team would file the request to freeze the accounts tied to the operation, especially the Cayman branch and the shell companies feeding it. By the time Brandon walked into the church smiling like the perfect son-in-law, the money would already be frozen. No escape route, no emergency transfer, no quiet exit. And when dirty money suddenly stops moving, the people behind it start panicking. But while Kenneth's team followed the money, the surveillance team uncovered something even uglier. Brandon Pierce and Samantha Rowe weren't just business partners, they were a couple. Surveillance photos showed Brandon picking Samantha up outside an office building, kissing her like they had nothing to hide. And just like people who believe they're untouchable, Kenneth played me a short recording from that meeting, just enough to be legally usable. Samantha's voice came through, cold and calculated. "Haley will take the fall. She's the daughter people will believe she made a mistake." There was a pause. "By the time they figure it out," she added calmly, "we'll already be gone." Brandon laughed, in that same arrogant way. "She loves me," he said. "She'll do whatever I say. She'll do whatever I say. She loves me." Hearing that made something twist deep in my chest. Because Haley Grant, my daughter, wasn't just part of the scheme. When everything exploded, Brandon and Samantha Rowe planned to disappear, leaving Haley standing alone in the wreckage, taking the blame while the world called her the villain. And that's when I understood something important. The wedding day wasn't just the place where I would expose them. It was the place where I had to pull Haley out of the hole before she was buried under their crimes. The 3 weeks before the wedding were the hardest weeks of my life, because I had to pretend I knew nothing. I still smiled at Haley. I asked about the dress fittings. I nodded along while Brandon Pierce played the caring future son-in-law, saying fake noble things like, "I just want to make sure your father is taken care of." I let him believe I was still the same old man he thought he could manipulate. Because predators get careless when the prey looks calm. Behind the scenes, I did the exact opposite of what they thought. I copied the USB several times and hid the backups in different places. I used a separate phone for all contact with Kenneth Walsh and the forensic team. I documented everything: when Brandon met Samantha, what they discussed, when money moved, who showed up, who disappeared. I didn't eat or drink anything Brandon handed me. I didn't get into a car without checking it first. Every single day, I repeated the same sentence to myself. If I slip even once, Golden Meadows gets to me before the police do. And I prepared the most important part of all the wedding day. I was going to let them believe they had won. Then I was going to pull the lever. Because this was no longer just a story about being deceived. It was a story about surviving long enough to destroy the trap from the inside. This had stopped being about pride or embarrassment. It was about who walks out free. And who walks out in handcuffs. The wedding day arrived. The church was full. Guests whispering, phones ready for photos, the soft music playing as Haley Grant walked down the aisle in a white dress that looked like it belonged in a perfect memory. At the front stood Brandon Pierce, hands folded, wearing the calm expression of a devoted future son-in-law. And right when the officiant was about to ask the question, "Does anyone object?" I stood up. I didn't shout. I simply spoke loud enough for the entire church to hear. "Yes, I object." The room turned toward me all at once. Haley froze mid-step. Brandon immediately tried to speak over me, but I raised a hand and cut him off. "For the past 3 weeks," I said calmly, "you've been staging a fake wedding to unlock my trust fund and secure a power of attorney. The plan was to push me into Golden Meadows using a purchased mental capacity evaluation. Gasps rippled through the church. Brandon's face changed instantly from polite concern to something much sharper. "Sir, I think you're confused." I held up a small black USB drive. 47 minutes of your voices planning it, I said. Then I nodded once toward the back of the church. And that was when the doors opened. The moment I played the recording, Brandon talking about Golden Meadows, Samantha laying out the offshore transfers, and Brandon bragging about cutting my brakes, I said the final line that shattered whatever was left of their performance. "And this groom standing here isn't Ethan Cole," I said. "His real name is Logan Price. He's an actor you hired for $50,000. The church exploded. People gasped. Chairs scraped. Someone in the back dropped a phone. Haley looked like her legs might give out beneath her, and Brandon, for the first time since I'd known him, lost all color in his face, because he understood exactly what I understood. It was over. The second I mentioned the $2.3 million, Golden Meadows, and the brake sabotage, Brandon lunged toward me, trying to rip the phone from my hand, but Kenneth Walsh was already standing in the center aisle. He stepped in front of Brandon with the kind of calm that only comes from a man who has stopped people like this before. Not dramatic, not loud, just solid enough to kill Brandon's momentum on impact. At the same time, from the back pews, a woman rose, moved forward, and held up her badge. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and sharp. "Federal agents. Nobody move." That was the moment the entire church froze. Samantha Rowe went pale and took a step back, like she might still find a way to slip out. She didn't get far. 2 agents were already on either side of her. The groom, Logan Price, just stood there in shock when they called him by his real name. "Logan Price," one of them said. "You are being detained as part of an investigation into fraud and conspiracy to seize assets." Then Haley turned and looked at Brandon. I'll never forget that look. It was the exact second the truth hit her in full. The moment she understood, she had never been the partner in Brandon's plan. She had been the prop, the shield, the one meant to stand in the fire while he and Samantha disappeared. Brandon still tried to fight it. "This is a misunderstanding," he shouted. But Kenneth answered in the same cold, even tone he'd used from day one. "A misunderstanding doesn't come with 47 minutes of confession." That line landed harder than any scream could have, because everybody in that church knew it was true. When the handcuffs clicked shut around Brandon Pierce's wrists right there in the middle of the church, I knew the fake wedding was over. Now the law would handle the rest. But what came next wasn't the movie version, where everyone breathes out and walks away. It was paperwork, interviews, and numbers so cold they almost felt unreal. Kenneth Walsh and the forensic team went straight after the money. The trail showed $2.3 million siphoned from my trust over 3 years, fake invoices, shell companies, and transfers routed toward offshore accounts. But the timing of the plan worked exactly as Kenneth predicted. Because the legal request to freeze the accounts had gone in the morning of the wedding. So when the system locked down the Cayman-linked accounts and the shell companies feeding them, most of the money hadn't made its final jump yet. It was stuck, frozen, evidence. I didn't recover every dollar that had been stolen. That's rarely how these things end, but I recovered enough. Enough to make sure Brandon Pierce would never disappear with my life's work. Brandon Pierce was charged with a stack of crimes: fraud, theft from a trust, conspiracy to place an elderly person in a care facility to strip legal control, and the attempted murder angle tied to the brake sabotage. Samantha Rowe was charged as the coordinator, the architect behind the paperwork, the money flow, and the legal trap. And Logan Price, the fake groom, was charged for participating in the staged marriage and hiding his identity to help execute the scheme. But the part that hurt the most didn't happen in court. It happened in a quiet interview room. Haley Grant sat across from investigators, barely able to speak. She didn't scream or argue the way Brandon had. She just cried silently, the way someone cries when the truth finally lands. For the first time, she understood something brutal. She hadn't been planning a wedding. She had been seconds away from signing documents that would have buried her own father alive in paperwork. And the worst realization of all? Brandon had already decided she would be the one left behind to take the blame. I didn't feel victory watching that, just a heavy, complicated kind of silence. Because the law could handle Brandon and Samantha, but fixing what that man did to my daughter, that was going to take a lot longer.